Good morning, I'm Richard Gage, AIA, member of the American Institute of Architects and founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. I represent 2,200 architects and engineers who are demanding a real investigation of what happened here at Ground Zero in New York. We're here today on September 11th to commemorate the 13th anniversary of what happened on 9/11, the catastrophic destruction of all three World Trade Center skyscrapers, and to tell the truth about that event to the American people, because they have not received the truth. They have not received the evidence.
Bringing attention to the destruction of the three World Trade Center towers in New York City on September 11th, 2001, and a whole lot more. This is 9/11 Free Fall. Good evening, everyone. This is Andy Steele, your host. Thank you again for tuning in, and I'm happy to be back here after the 13th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, all of the events that took place in New York City this year. We don't have any guests this week, so it's just me, and I'm going to be catching up. I haven't had a chance to talk to you in quite a while because we've had our guest interviews run a little long in recent weeks. So there's a lot to go over. I'm going to be doing it with you this hour. Before we do get into all the latest news in the realm of 9/11 and the controlled demolition evidence, we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We'll do that starting now. And that is 10 seconds. So, like I said, I'm happy to be back from New York. It's Monday night as I record this program. And I returned on, I think it was early Sunday morning. New York City always wipes me out whenever I go down there, folks. It's a beautiful city and a lot going on, very busy place. I recommend everybody visit it at least once in your lifetime. However, I'm very happy to be back in my nice little beachside village right now. I'm just not a big city person. Many people, I love people, but sometimes it can feel a little bit claustrophobic when you're surrounded by a lot of them in the street, and all the giant buildings is just not my style. So happy to be back, but happy to have been standing with so many great people out there on Church Street on the anniversary this year, talking about the controlled demolition evidence, just like we do every week. But you get your batteries charged, as I've said before on this show, and you meet so many awesome individuals, people who are awake, people who make that pilgrimage every year to be part of the remembrance of what happened and remembrance of what didn't happen. And of course, what didn't happen is the government's official lie that fire brought down Building 7, that the airplane impacts and fire brought down the towers 1 and 2, because the evidence, of course, is overwhelming that explosives did that. And we've interviewed all those experts. We continue to interview them, and we're going to be having some great guests in the next coming weeks. But just to quickly go over some of the things that I observed down there, there was a lot of press that came to Ground Zero or to the protest taking place. I saw Richard Gage. He did his press conference there on the street. He also took some interviews. I saw the InfoWars reporters interviewed him, Press TV, other venues that I'm not familiar with, news broadcasts that I'm not familiar with. I was actually interviewed a couple of times on the street too. And one thing that I was very careful about when I was interviewed was that I didn't get into assigning any blame. That's a very important thing, folks, is to not get into complicity if you can help it. Because the fact is, even though we can make some very good educated hypotheses, and even though we can understand that there had to be some kind of insider help, that it's very unlikely that a ragtag group of terrorists, like we were told, pulled off the 9/11 attacks, could have gotten explosives into the World Trade Center buildings. Even though these are facts, we don't know the full story yet. We don't know if there were insiders in the government that helped it along, who they were actually working for, if they were actually working for our government or if they're working for somebody else's or some other organization. We don't have the full story. What we do know, and what the evidence proves, is that the government's story isn't correct, that there were some kind of explosives that brought them down. Okay, the nanothermite's been found in the dust. And from there, we unravel the truth like a Christmas present for the American people. But we have to stick to what we can prove. And this actually impressed the guy that was interviewing me. And he said this. He said, I appreciate your standing. I forgot the exact words he used, but standing just to what you can prove, not getting into speculation. And I can't emphasize this enough. And something that I want to play for you right now, and it's funny. I heard this before I went to New York. My friend had sent me a link to a radio station. She wanted me to listen to some program that was on. I actually fell asleep while I was listening to it, and then Coast to Coast AM came on after this program while I was sleeping, and throughout the night the program played, but just remarkably, I happened to wake up for no reason whatsoever. It's Coast to Coast AM I'm listening to, so maybe it was a ghost or something woke me up just because I'm listening to Coast AM. They get into some of those freaky supernatural things. But joking aside, I happened to just wake up right before this caller calls into the program, and I caught this exchange. So I'm going to go ahead and play that exchange right now, and I want you to listen to this entire conversation because beyond what she says at first, don't get angry and immediately turn it off. This is why it's so important to stick to what we can prove and just focus on the controlled demolition evidence, because it casts such a wider net of people that will support us, as you're going to hear. All right, listen.
Kevin, I'm glad you can laugh about that. That's important. Let's go to Kentucky. Jesse's with us now. Hey, Jess, go ahead.
Hi, George, you there?
Yep.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for taking my call, y'all. It's great to talk to you again.
I had you on hold so long, you almost fell asleep on me or something.
Oh, I did. It was so great to get through that. I've been trying to get through for so long, and I was so psyched that the Chell actually took my call. Thank you so much. Thank you for the show. Thank you and the whole Coast to Coast team for what you do. Love it. This is where I get my news. It's awesome. First of all, my condolences to your sister. I will keep you and your family in my prayers. I wanted to talk to you about a couple of things. First off, about this whole 9/11 conspiracy thing. It really kind of irritates me to hear people talk about, the government was in on 9/11 and all this stuff. I really don't believe that there was any kind of conspiracy at all. If anything, I think the farthest that the government had anything to do with it was simply the Central Intelligence Agency withholding, critical information from, the White House and the President and the Department of Defense and everything. But I honestly, there were probably several government officials who had friends and family in the World Trade Center. Why would they hurt their own people that way? And, second of all, if the American people ever found out that, that there the government was involved in any shape, form, or fashion, there would be a riot all over the country. It would go crazy. There would be no civil order. I mean, I just don't think that they would be that silly, to be honest with you. I mean,
keep in mind that I don't think anybody in government had anything to do with it either. But think about a rogue group that has, illicit money and power. That's conceivable. I'm not going to rule that out.
Absolutely. No, I totally believe that's plausible. And actually, several callers ago, a couple of people called in talking about how, they had this theory that possibly the terrorists had infiltrated the World Trade Center pre-9/11 and, could possibly have planted, explosive devices and stuff like that. I believe that's absolutely plausible theory and definitely should be investigated further. Most definitely. My second comment that I just want to get off real quick.
Okay, so there you go, folks. Jesse from Kentucky really demonstrates why it is so important to stick to the evidence. Now, She calls in initially saying that she's really annoyed with the people who call in and blame it on the government. All right. And of course, we've been conditioned through the mass media to think that anybody who talks about any kind of insider complicity, and of course, when you talk about the government, the government's a pretty big thing. All right. Government includes many, many people. I don't have the statistics on how many people work for the U.S. government. I can't pull that out of my head. But there's a lot of people that do it, including people I know, people who work for Social Security Administration. So whenever an event happens, and when you speculate on insider complicity, and you say general terms like the government, all right, then you're implying that all of these people who are involved in government are somehow in on it. That's what goes on in people's heads. That's what people think when you say that. Now, you might mean differently, but I've learned this just over the years, is that when you say something, people hear what you say, they don't necessarily hear what you mean. So you have to be very careful and choose your words in a precise manner. Obviously, people who are working in the Social Security Administration at the time of 9/11 had nothing to do with 9/11. All right. If there was some kind of insider involvement, it would involve people in key positions, and then a lot of other people who may not even know that they're participating in some sort of operation or insider conspiracy or whatever. So Jessie in Kentucky calls in. She's annoyed by people who say it was the government. She points out all of these reasons for why the government would not want to do 9/11, assuming that the government is looking out for the interests of all people, or that all people within government are looking out for the interests of America as opposed to themselves. Who cares? Put that aside. All right, it's very easy to get annoyed with Jessie. If you just listen to what Jessie said initially, and if you just launched into a tirade, as some people might do if they hear something like that, because they know better, they know that there is more to 9/11, that 9/11 needs to be reinvestigated. All right, then you would lose Jessie. And we need people like Jessie. We need people who are on the middle to support a new investigation. So hear how George Norrie expertly re-examines the question, how he proposes it to her. And he says, well, I don't believe it was the government. All the people that work in government, essentially, is what he's saying. He says, well, what about a rogue group? And she says, oh, I think that's very plausible. So we see that Jessie is not as closed-minded as she at first initially seems. She says it's very plausible that some kind of rogue group could have helped perpetuate the attacks. All right, that there could have been more to 9/11 than we at first were told. And then she herself voluntarily offers up the idea, because she's heard it before from so many people talking about it, about the science of this, that there could have been preset explosives put in the towers ahead of time to help bring them down. And again, regardless of how you feel about Jessie's attitude towards 9/11 quote-unquote conspiracy theorists, as so many people who question 9/11 have been dubbed, Jessie from Kentucky is exactly where we need her to be. All right, she doesn't have to agree that it was some kind of inside operation. She simply needs to agree that there needs to be a new investigation. And then once you get a new investigation, once you get a consensus from not just the experts that have come out and spoke out about the controlled demolition evidence, but from generally everybody, including those in government, that there was some kind of preset explosives put in the towers to help bring them down, then we can start getting into who and what and where and why and how. We can have that real investigation and answer some of these questions. And I said this when I was on a show earlier this week, is that why I now, and I haven't always, but why I now try not to get into naming names and pointing fingers and saying this person was absolutely responsible for 9/11 or this person orchestrated it, is because I don't know if it ends there. People say Dick Cheney. And I think, just from my own personal opinion, I think it's a very good suspect, someone who would certainly need to be investigated. But even if he was involved, we don't know who he was working for. The investigation doesn't just end there. You could put the entire Bush administration in jail, and you may not have caught all of the people who were involved in it. All right, and people will respond more to hard evidence than speculation. That is an important thing to remember. All right, there's a difference between evidence and speculation. And if you are speculating, then you need to qualify it as that. And Jesse from Kentucky demonstrates that. Now, also I want to go over some news from this week. And what I'm going to do, I want to get this news out of the way because it is fairly important to bring up. But since I was busy all the week of 9/11, and I did some interviews, I want to go over some common themes I heard. One of them was what I just played for you right now, was people trying to get into complicity, trying to get me to say, who do I think was responsible for the attacks. Before I do get into that, I want to get into this news with you. We have an article here from 10 News, Tampa Bay, Sarasota. It says, 10 investigates allegations of FBI 9/11 cover-up. And it begins, 13 years after the 9/11 attacks, we are now learning of allegations of a major FBI cover-up that connects Sarasota and the 9/11 hijackers to the Saudi Arabian government. As 10 investigates discovered, there is a growing chorus calling for the reopening of the 9/11 investigation, and it is being led by one of Florida's most influential leaders, former Senator Bob Graham. And then it goes on at the bottom, or in the middle of it, excuse me, there was a network supporting the hijackers, says former U.S. Senator and Florida Governor Bob Graham. According to Graham, the FBI has been covering up that fact for years and continues to try and hide it even now. Graham says he is convinced there was a direct line between some of the terrorists who carried out the September 11th attacks and the government of Saudi Arabia. Graham says the U.S. government doesn't want the American public to find out the Saudis financed the attack because we provide billions in military aid to Saudi Arabia. That would certainly change our attitude towards arming Saudi Arabia, Graham says. According to Graham, the FBI was aware of the strong connection between hijackers and a Saudi Arabian family who were living in an upscale Sarasota gated community. 12 days before 9/11, the family abandoned the house, leaving behind valuable items including food, clothing, furnishings, and 3 vehicles. There are some things I can't talk about, Graham told us, and there are others, like what I know is involved in the investigation in Sarasota, which is diametrically opposed to what the FBI said publicly. As proof, Graham points to 12 pages of newly declassified documents tying the Sarasota family to the 9/11 hijackers. The FBI claims it turned over all of its 9/11 files to the Congressional Committee, but Graham, who also headed the Congressional Committee investigation into 9/11, says he asked other commission members who confirmed they did not receive any documents from the FBI concerning the Sarasota investigation. There are actually thousands of documents that are not being released. And I like this quote here, okay? Hear this. After having said there were no documents about the investigation in Sarasota, no has now become 80,000 pages, that Graham adds. I think that should be stunning to the American people that an agency of our government would deceive its own people so dramatically. Graham, who is concerned about the ties between ISIS and support groups, points to the new documents that show the Tampa division of the FBI identified an international businessman who was a relative of the family and an antagonist of the United States and traveled to Sarasota after 9/11 with the intentions, it says, to begin offensive operations against the United States. According to Graham, I am concerned if there was a network assisting the 19 hijackers in place in 2000 and 2001, there is no reason to believe that it was eliminated. Now, the article goes on. Graham and a growing group in Congress are concerned that the United States is vulnerable to another terrorist attack, and he says the American public needs to know the truth. I am not the Lone Ranger on this. In fact, the people who know the most about it are the ones who have the most trouble sleeping. Graham says the more you know, the worse it gets, and that if the Broward Bulldog, a non-profit news service, hadn't won a Freedom of Information lawsuit, the latest documents would still be withheld from the American public. Graham is also joining the families of the victims in a growing chorus in Congress pushing to declassify the 28 pages he helped write, release the 80,000 pages, and reopen the 9/11 investigations. Now, what does this have to do with controlled demolition? Well, it's both under the 9/11 umbrella. And when something like this opens up a U.S. senator's eyes, it also means their eyes might be open to the idea that there were more to the building destructions than at first they were told to. And it also goes to show that the 9/11 plotters or people involved, or the people we've been told were involved, obviously had more support than the official story could allow them to have. All right, it opens it up to the idea of a quote-unquote bigger conspiracy. And we forget that the official 9/11 story itself is a conspiracy theory. So that's it's the great irony whenever anyone who talks about physics and common sense does so, they're called a conspiracy theorist, but the official story itself is a conspiracy theory. The Saudi Arabian connection that Graham is alluding to, and the reason that he's calling out for this, the declassifying of the 28 pages and more, and calling for a new investigation into 9/11, that itself is a conspiracy theory. And it's interesting, this again, that paragraph where he says, the more you know, the worse it gets, and that if this Broward Bulldog, which was a non-profit news service, if they hadn't won a Freedom of Information lawsuit, these documents would still be withheld from the American public. Very similar to what's going on with the controlled demolition evidence, with a group of researchers that did Freedom of Information Act requests and discovered that NIST omitted key features of Building 7's construction that would have prevented their collapse hypothesis from even happening. We've covered that in previous episodes. All right, so what this is showing is that at least when it comes to Saudi Arabia and a potential Saudi Arabian connection to 9/11, it's becoming more acceptable in politics, in Congress, to question the official story, to demand a new investigation. Now, our job here in 9/11 Truth, and 9/11 Science Truth, rather, is to demand that investigation be expansive. To demand that investigation include a new, or rather a real investigation into what brought Building 7 down, and the Twin Towers, really, since explosives brought those down as well. That's our job. And so Mr. Graham needs to hear from you. All right, so you need to get onto his congressional webpage and contact him. But this is very promising news. And yes, I know, I understand that this still fear-mongers. This still gets everybody in the mindset that terrorists attacked us that day and we need to fear the Muslim boogeyman. And people might shy away from outreach towards Senator Graham because of that. But again, we don't need to be slapping hands away, folks. All right, if his eyes are open to this, his eyes may be more open to the controlled demolition evidence. Again, we need to get it away from just blaming, quote-unquote, the government. And I'm not saying that there was no insider government complicity. What I'm saying is that we need to get to the truth. We need to look at the evidence as it's laid out on the table and stick to what we can prove. And if there was some kind of insider complicity, again, let's find out who they were working for. Were they working for themselves or were they working for somebody else? Because if there was insider complicity, they're not working for the U.S. government, and therefore they are not technically part of the U.S. government, even if they managed to infiltrate it. Very important. So that's that. Now, I also want to play something for you. This was on September the 12th. This year, it was C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Lee Hamilton of the 9/11 Commission stopped by to talk to Peter Slen, and somebody questioned him about Building 7, and no, I didn't have anything to do with it. So I want you to hear Mr. Hamilton's response. I'm going to play that for you now.
A secondary role to the executive branch in making the decision to go in.
Phil, Centerville, Massachusetts. About 5 minutes left with our guest. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning, Representative. I have two questions. The first question is, and I'm not a birther, 9/11 truther. I just want to know, did the question of Building 7, did that question come up and how it collapsed during the commission? And also, if it didn't, why not?
Building 7 was a major focus of our investigation. Building 7 was not one of the really big towers, but it was a substantial building, I think 30, 40 stories high. It collapsed. It was not hit directly by the airplanes. And there was a huge debate, still is a debate, as to why that building collapsed. We on the commission were not engineers, certainly not experts on why buildings collapse. What we did was we consulted with the engineers of the country, and they came up with their best judgment as to why that building went down. I don't remember all the details, but the basic point of it was that there was intense heat developed within the building. The sprinkler systems did not work, and such intense heat built up that the building eventually collapsed. Now, a lot of people have been looking into that since 9/11 Commission reported. They've had a lot of criticism of the Commission because they didn't think we explored it properly. We did what we could do. We consulted the experts. And of course, experts often disagree with one another. So I think that debate continues. I've heard all kinds of explanations as to why Building 7 collapsed. I don't pretend to be an expert on that. Some of the ideas put forward don't make a lot of sense to me, but then I'm no engineer and I don't know anything much about architecture. But we took the word of the best advice we could get, and they gave the reason, which we spelled out in some detail in the commission report.
Lee Hamilton, what's your response to those folks? And by the way, we did a full segment on this program on Building 7 and some of the conspiracy theories regarding 9/11. But what's your general response to folks who think 9/11 was an inside job or pre-planned?
I just don't think there's very much evidence for it, and there's a good bit of evidence for what we found. We were charged with the responsibility of determining how this happened, Building 7 and all the rest of it. We wrote the story in a very telling chapter, the first chapter of the report, bestseller incidentally in the book sales in this country. I think that story has basically held up. There are a lot of people who don't agree with all the facts of it, but at the end of the day, you can't just theorize here. You have to bring forth hard facts. When you're investigating these complicated events, you get thousands of suggestions. Literally every morning, hundreds of emails would come in with suggestions of what should be done and what should not be done. You go through those things the best you can with a limited staff. You make judgments as best you can under the circumstances. I think we basically got it right on the evidence we had. Now, evidence may develop in years ahead that will change some part of our story. I don't think it has thus far. I think we basically got it right. You've got to get hard facts to support any idea that you have with regard to what happened on that terrible day.
And Charles Bellavista.
All right, well, you have to have hard facts. We have hard facts. 105 feet of free fall is a hard fact, admitted in the NIST report after they were forced to admit to it because of David Chandler. All right, omissions from the NIST Building 7 report are hard facts. All right, so that certainly needs to be reinvestigated and redone with the correct information in it, because it completely debunks NIST's explanation for what happened that day. Nanothermite has been experimented, tested. Nanothermite in the dust. It's there. We need a new investigation. These are hard facts. This is science. But I like Lee Hamilton's response overall, because he admits, and this is a key line in there, is that the debate still continues. All right? He says, we worked off the best information that we had, but the debate continues, and he leaves it open. So what does that mean? All right, does that mean he's looked at some of the evidence, that he's aware? Obviously, he's aware of the controversy surrounding Building 7, but he's aware of some of these facts that I brought up? Some of these facts disproving NIST's explanation? Some of these facts that prove that the debate isn't finished, making him say that line on the show? Interestingly enough, Peter Slen, and the thing is, I've watched enough of these C-SPAN interactions back when the campaign was going on, and then I had somebody monitoring C-SPAN for me in case anybody called in on 9/11 or around 9/11, just on their own asking questions about Building 7, and they told me about this. But so just from the campaign and from this, I noticed that something that Peter Slen tends to like to do is put people on the spot. When the question should just be about Building 7 and what brought it down, getting away from complicity or the blame game, he likes to put people on the spot and say, so what do you have to say to those people who think that it was an inside job? So what's somebody who is in a political position, somebody with some political esteem going to say right there? Like, yeah, I agree, it was an inside job. No, he knows that Lee Hamilton's not going to say that. So Lee Hamilton's going to give his kind of his demeaning laugh and say that he doesn't see any evidence for that, to try to undermine the discussion about Building 7 itself. That's what I think is going on there. That's just a guess. I can't get into Peter Slen's head. It just seems like the most obvious hypothesis of what he's doing based on what the result is each time, and the fact that he makes a point of doing it each time. All right, but what's funny is at the very end, Lee Hamilton sort of brings it back and says that you need to support theories with facts. Well, we do have the facts, but he leaves the debate still open. I think that's big news. I think that's huge news that Lee Hamilton said that. Hopefully it'll be big news by Thursday night when the show airs. I'm going to make sure that there is a video of it up on the 911freefall.com YouTube channel for everybody to watch. Hopefully it'll be up on Blogger by Thursday night. But the debate's still being open, acknowledged by the 9/11 commissioner right there. That is a huge deal. So if the debate is still open, why are we not allowed to have it in the media? Why do we have to agitate to even get it on television? That should be the next question. If the own 9/11 commissioner, Mr. 9/11 commissioner right there, Lee Hamilton, says the debate's still open, why can't we have the debate? Why can't we have a new investigation? That question is up for you to ask. Now, I said earlier that I did a lot of interviews during the week on some shows I hadn't even heard of before, but I'll make sure I get them up in some fashion for people to listen to if you want to. But it's funny, I hear these common questions asked, and in one sense it's good. It makes the interview easy because then I can have common answers to give them ready to go. But there are things that I don't want to hear anymore. And I think they're questions that I think we should be past by now, here 13 years after the event happened, and however many years after people started waking up to the controlled demolition evidence. I mean, the first one is asking who did it. I don't know who did it. I have some guesses. I have some, not even just guesses, educated hypotheses, as I said. The important thing is to first prove the controlled demolition. We talked about that. But another thing is that I get asked is the emotional impact of the implications of the controlled demolition evidence. What does this do to America? What would this do to the nation? And I hear people talk about this, about the emotional impact it has on you when you first find out. And I guess I understand it to a certain extent, but to another extent I don't. And I guess this is what makes me different than a lot of people, because it's really no skin off my nose if it turns out that Cheney was involved, for example. It's really no skin off my nose whether he does a perp walk or spends the rest of his life in jail or whatever happens to him. Because I haven't paternalized my government. I don't look at it as my daddy or as some extension of me. I look at it as an entity charged with a task, because you got to have some form of government over a country, and it's filled with people. People are just as fallible as anybody else. And if one of them happens to be a criminal, then so be it. He needs to face justice. But that has no reflection on me individually. All right, it's not the same betrayal as you would feel as if your father tried to kill you. It's not the same thing. It's not your family. It doesn't care about you. It's not trying to make your life better. It only is if you make it work. All right, it's made up of us. We're its boss. It's just a machine. It's just some organization. And it's just as susceptible to corruption as any other organization. You know, it's funny, I hear so many conservatives talk about how the unions are corrupt, and they've been corrupted, and they're just out for themselves, and they're criminals, and mafia, and all this stuff. Now, I'm not going to give my opinion on that. That's not what this show is about. All right, but I'm pointing that out because they'll say that about the unions, but then to think, well, someone in our government may have been involved in 9/11. You know, when you prove the controlled demolition evidence, obviously that's the next question that people often ask themselves. That's an instant non-starter for these same people. That people will acknowledge corruption in other organizations, but they can't look at it in the U.S. government. And this is just you and me talking, you know, and I know earlier I was saying avoid speculation, avoid pointing any fingers, and that's not what I'm doing right now. I'm just saying, I'm just talking about this emotional impact question of knowing that there's more to 9/11, that there's something's being covered up. And, you know, for people who face the question of, you know, obviously when you look at the controlled demolition evidence, you know that it was pre-planted explosives brought it down. And what does that mean? Could someone in government have been involved and they have this horrible feeling and this horrible sickness in them to think that their daddy paternal government could do that, you know, and they turn it off. They don't want to face it. They're afraid of it. If you're that person, I mean, my answer to that is get over it. Not because I'm trying to be mean here, but this is for your own survival. You have to face reality. And the government's not your parent. It doesn't care about you. Right? It's not a person. It's made up of people. Another question I was asked was, how do you fight this? How do you fight an entity that obviously has a tremendous amount of resources to be able to pull off putting explosives in the Twin Towers in Building 7, and seemingly, by the way the media acts, has the ability to orchestrate a cover-up of this issue, to somehow intimidate or do whatever is necessary to keep the media from looking into this. You know, to prod people to marginalize anybody that talks about this evidence. How do you fight that? It just seems so overwhelming, so daunting. And I acknowledge that it's not easy. I mean, it's not something that you can do in 5 minutes. But we have so much more than the people that we're up against. We have so much more going for us. First of all, we have the fact that we're right. We have the truth on our side. And we also have the fact that we're not defending something. We're not defending an official story that has more holes in it than Swiss cheese. Okay, we're not defending this dark, ugly castle, Snake Mountain fortress that was erected on September 11th. I mean, think about it. The real perpetrators of 9/11, whoever they may be, and they're gotten away with it right now. So to an extent, they really haven't gotten away with it because here we are doing a show every week talking about it. Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth has proven the crime took place, the real crime, the controlled demolition of the buildings in New York. They really haven't gotten away with it, but they haven't been arrested yet. So now they have to defend themselves. They have to keep this lie solidified in everybody's mind, and forget the fact that they're losing that battle. Think about the stress that they have to go through. Think about life for them. Going on for the rest of their years having to cover up a crime. Think about any kind of criminal. It reminds me of like the Telltale Heart. You know, the heartbeat that drove the murderer insane. Because it's all them. There's a scene in the Avengers movie. Love superheroes. Love superhero movies. Tony Stark says to Loki, maybe you overrun us. Maybe you overwhelm us and you take over. Something to this effect. But then it's all you. Because if we can't defend the Earth, then we'll make damn sure that we avenge it. They shot first. The real people who perpetrated 9/11 were the first to fire. They were the first to plant their flag and build up this fortress. And now it's all on them. They have to spend the rest of their lives making sure that this crime gets covered up. And every time people awaken, every time a new person speaks out, every time somebody goes out on the internet and brings forward new information, or talks about this, or every time AE 9/11 Truth does something awesome, like the digital billboard that's now in Times Square, they have to worry a little bit. They have to worry a lot. They have to know that America, the world, is breathing down their necks. All right, that is not a comfortable place to be. So at the very least, even if you think we're doing nothing, at the very least, we're ruining their lives. We're ruining whatever reward they thought they would get from doing 9/11. Because it's not exactly going their way. So, right there, we're at a position of strength. We're in a position of power. Not them. And then when you take into consideration what KRS-One said in that speech I played on this program probably a year ago. KRS-One is a rapper, really great speaker. Love listening to him. I'd like to get him on the show sometime. But he said that the other side has to pay people to do their bidding. They have to pay people to put out propaganda and do all the work that it takes to keep this crime covered up. Whereas the people on our side, the great majority of them, we're doing it because we want to. We're volunteers, all right? We're fighting because we want to fight. And I'm doing this show because I want to put it out there. I want to talk to you. I want to talk about the controlled demolition evidence. All right, so which side is stronger? The side that has to constantly spend money to pay people to do something? Or the side that just has the will and keeps on going? The side that's fighting because it wants to fight. So there's another strike against the other side. But putting those aside, just the fact that we have will. Look, how do you fight something that has the ability to pay people a lot of money and perpetuate this cover-up and variously defend the official story? How do you fight something like that? You are never too big to get your butt whooped. Well, let me repeat that. You are never too big to get your butt whooped. Everybody can be brought down. All right, remember Rocky IV. I know it's fiction, but it's a good lesson for life. Or the big Russian, the big machine, the big blonde guy that killed Apollo Creed. Very scary looking guy, and everyone calls him this machine throughout the movie. And he's out there in his powerful exercise bike and the fancy gym, and Rocky's out there chopping wood and doing the old pioneer kind of training. And yeah, for the first 2 rounds, he's throwing Rocky around and like a rag doll and beating up on him pretty good. But then at one point, Rocky just throws out a punch and connects right way and cuts the Russian. And the Russian looks down at the blood on his glove that's coming from his head with horror. And Rocky starts getting the advantage on him. Brings the playing field down to his level. And his trainer tells him, you cut him, you see? He's not a machine, he's just a man. Well, I say the same thing about the people that we're up against. The real perpetrators of 9/11, the people in the media, people in the government. All right, these are just people. All right, they are not machines. They are not gods. They are not superior beings. Trust me, I've talked to some of these people, especially the politicians. All right, they're not superior beings to us. They're just men and women. They're just as fallible as anybody else. And they are more scared of you than you need to be of them. That's the truth, folks. Congratulations, you got more power. Now, there's a lot you can do with that. When you just don't care. And when I say just don't care, obviously you care about 9/11. You care about the truth of 9/11 coming out. That should be your passion. That should be what fuels you. But when you don't care about the rewards that these people care about, when you can run in a race for Congress and you can be okay with not being the congressman, when your whole life doesn't center around becoming the congressman of your district and someday becoming president. If you can go back to your day job just fine and your ambitions in check, you can do a lot. You can tell the truth. Look at the guest we had many months ago who's running his campaign off of a Google Plus page. All right, and he won his primary for a state assembly. He's going up for the general election in November here. When you don't care about these rewards that our system creates, you can be more powerful than even the most richest man in the world because you got that will. You got that spirit. It doesn't mean anything to you. So we have a lot of pluses on our side. And then one more plus is that it's the nature of tyrants to destroy themselves. That's what they always do. Or tyrannical systems. Right? Because they get arrogant. They get cocky. They make mistakes. They think they have no limits. It's the reason Hitler attacked Russia. Expanded the war beyond what he could handle. I think 9/11 itself was that step too far. I mean, we think of it as them having gotten away with that, but the history hasn't been written yet. I mean, it's been 13 years, which seems like a long time because our lives are so short in the big scheme of the world, but in the big picture, 13 years is not a lot of time. And particularly with Building 7, if they thought they could bring that down and not have engineers and architects all over the country seize on that, catch that, talk about it, that really shows how arrogant they are. So I really think they've already overstepped their bounds. So actually, people bring up this idea that they're unbeatable because they have money. But I think we're unbeatable because we're right. We have right on our side. We shouldn't worry about it. Because we will win in the end. That's the nature of what people like us do. Another thing I hear people bring up a lot is Noam Chomsky. This big-time anti-establishment icon that doesn't agree with us. And I'll be honest with you, folks. I really didn't know who Noam Chomsky was until I got into 9/11 Truth. I really didn't care who he was. I don't particularly now. I had a liberal friend who used to talk about him and reading his books. And back before I woke up to 9/11, I just sort of nodded my head and said, okay. And went about my day. But I've heard Noam Chomsky, since I've been in 9/11 Truth, I've heard him confronted about this, and people seem to be very eager to get him to agree with us. And I heard him say a statement, and I don't have it in front of me, but it was something to the effect of, this is when he was asked about architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, which now has over 2,200 verified building experts who signed its petition calling for a new investigation into the destruction of Building 7 and 9/11, and the Twin Towers too. He said something like, well, spending an hour on the internet doesn't qualify you as an architect or an engineer. And of course, that is a spit in the face to all those professionals who have put their name to that petition. All right, I know that it's a very strict verification process that each one of those professionals has to go through. They have to submit their diplomas, and we had a person from the verifications team, Lila Selk, talk about it like a year ago on this program. So that right there, again, if I'm just talking about first impressions, and this had really been the first time that I had ever heard Noam Chomsky speak, so for a first impression, I'm not really all that impressed. That's not a very intelligent thing for this supposedly intelligent man to say. And so I get asked all these questions about Noam Chomsky, as if this is somebody that I really need to be impressed with and that I need to have validation from. And I just don't feel that I need to. But some people do. And I understand that he's a hero to some people. I understand that people got into this sort of anti-establishment thinking by reading some of his books and liking him and listening to him speak and bounce their opinions off of him to get some kind of validation for them. And that happens, though. I mean, that happens sometimes, that your heroes don't rise to the occasion. And so this is another instance in which I just say, get over it. Again, I don't really understand what the big deal about Noam Chomsky is. I understand he's got a lot of fans, and it would be cool if he could actually open his eyes and pull his head out of the sand and acknowledge that Building 7 was a controlled demolition. But I'm not living or dying by it. I don't really care what Noam Chomsky thinks. You know, the fact that he doesn't agree with us just means that he's wrong. And I don't need him to agree with me. And neither do you. Neither does the people in this audience. You know, it's another instance in which we need to get over putting people on pedestals, making people into icons. You know, you put somebody on a pedestal, they'll eventually fall off. I never want to be in that position. I try to stay as low-key as possible on this program. I don't think I'll ever develop a cult following as a radio host, and I don't want to, because I want it to be about the evidence. I want it to be about the guests. That's more interesting, I think, than listening to me speak. I don't know. But, again, Noam Chomsky not agreeing with us is not that big of a deal. It's only a big deal if you make it a big deal, if you give him that power. And I'll tell you what, when you have arrogant people, and that's kind of the sense I get from him when I listen to him speak, when you say something like spending an hour on the internet doesn't qualify you as an architect or an engineer, when everybody who signs that petition is thoroughly checked and verified as being a building expert, is arrogant and foolish. And so when you're dealing with someone like that, the best revenge is not to sit there and constantly combat him as if you really care about his opinion. The best response is to make them feel invisible, to completely erase them from the stage, completely cut them out, to make them irrelevant. Because thus then they become irrelevant. Now, you know, I've been asked to speculate on why Noam Chomsky won't talk about this, or why he won't look at the controlled demolition evidence, and people have told me maybe it's because he's been on record saying so for so long that there's nothing to it, that to acknowledge it now would damage his ego or challenge his authority on certain issues. I don't know. Again, I don't know what's going on in the guy's head. If that's the case, that's really more his problem than mine or any of yours. Our job is to awaken as many people as possible to the fact that those buildings were brought down in controlled demolitions, to the science, to get the new investigation. If somebody wants to foolishly cling to their ego and their quote-unquote authority and doesn't have the wisdom to change their opinions when the facts don't support their position, that's their problem. That's their loss. That's their tragedy. And so I say, let's not worry about Noam Chomsky anymore. I'm sick of hearing about it. This is, I think, the first time I've ever talked about it on my show, and it's probably going to be the last one. Our job is to wake up as many people as possible. And so if he can't live up to reality, that's his problem. However, I did have an idea and we're approaching the end of our show today, so I did have this idea. Some people might not be listening to me, might be having trouble letting go of the Chomsky love. So I found this great spell for teenage girls when they break up with a boy and they need to get over him. They have to get over their crush. All right, so I'm just saying, if you need it, if you're still hung up on Noam Chomsky, and just the fact that we can't get him to look at the evidence and admit that it was a controlled demolition, if this still bothers you, I think we can use this spell. So what you're going to need, according to this internet page, this getting over someone spell, it says you need 1 red candle for strength, and you need 2 white candles for healing, and you need a piece of paper with the person's name whom you wish to get over written on it. So we're going to write Noam Chomsky on this piece of paper here. And now you begin by placing the white candles left and right from the red. Then you light the red candle. And then the 2 white candles. Now I don't really have these candles, but that's the great thing about radio. You can use your imagination. So imagine that I'm lighting these candles. Alright, so then I'm also lighting this imaginary piece of paper with Noam Chomsky's name written on it. You got to light it on fire with his name, and then I guess you do it with the candles. It's a little unclear, but we'll in our minds we'll light the piece of paper on fire from the candles, and while doing so, you should be chanting these words: "I burn thy name, Noam Chomsky, so it shall be. Cast out of my memory. Your memory erased from my mind, no longer held by the constraints of time. I accept this now made manifest, so shall it be." And then the page says to visualize the person fading from your mind until they disappear from your mental screen. And it says this spell best works when the moon is waning. The waning moon is for doing spells that on things that you wish to go away from you. Now, I have no clue what the moon is doing tonight, but this is the best that I can offer you. Otherwise, just move on and focus on the people that are open to the evidence, to that fiery minority that is going to actually get something done. All right, that is going to conclude our episode of 9/11 Freefall for tonight. I want to thank everybody for listening. Remember, you can hear this program every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download this program from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.